rough as that neighborhood could be. We had us a community. Nobody, no victim, who didn't matter. And now all we got is bodies and predatory motherfuckers like you. And out where that girl fell, I saw kids acting like Omar, calling you by name, glorifying your ass. Makes me sick, motherfucker, how far we done fell.
Alex Cottrell and Toby Huntingford present Caught on the Wire. This podcast is an episode-by-episode analysis of HBO's widely acclaimed TV series about the city of Baltimore, its people, and its many problems. Find more information about the show and all the episodes online at caughtonthewire.wordpress.com.
Hello, welcome back to Caught on the Wire. It's Toby, and I'm here with Alex as always, and we're here today on episode is it six, isn't it? 6, sorry. Little brain fart. Episode 6, Homecoming of season 3 of The Wire. How's your week been, Alex?
It's been wonderful. Very productive. Weather's brightening up. It's been great.
Yeah.
I watched this episode a little while back as well. I actually watched it last week on Sunday, but I've refreshed my memory, so it's all good.
You just got to the point where you love podcasting so much that you just have to jump straight in after the episode.
Yeah, just want to see the next episode.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think I watched it over the weekend, so it's been a little while for me, but it's very fresh in my mind, and definitely be able to... A lot to say about this one, definitely. So yeah, it's been good. As always, we caught a couple of emails this week, and Damon got in contact. And Damon has been so far very observant at finding little links between actors on the show. So, for example, last week he pointed out that the guy who plays Nick's public defender is the same actor who plays the guy trying to convince Bunny to come work at Hopkins. And he informed us that it happens a few times throughout the show with different actors and roles, which is something that I had not noticed. I mean, I noticed a few of them, but Damon seems to have a real eagle eye for these, and this week he's found 2 more of them. So firstly, there was the guy, who is it? The corner chief standing with Bodie, who says, "Nah, it's a trap." And I think this is last episode. And this is when Colvin is trying to convince them to move to the free zone. He's the same actor as the Narcotics Anonymous meeting guy, Bubbles, meeting guy that Bubbles has to sign with in season 1. So he's the guy who says, "If you don't stay, we don't sign." And Damon admits that he has seen the show way too many times. #WireNerd. But that's a very, very eagle-eyed spot. Something that I certainly hadn't noticed. And it would take me quite a few more rewatches before I got there.
The question is if it's a use of sort of consistent characters, or if it's just a case of reusing extras or reusing minor characters, minor actors on the show even.
It could be continuity. You like to think so with the shows, don't you? But I guess when we're considering a Narcotics Anonymous rep turning into a crew chief in the space of 2 years, that might be a bit of a jump for that one. So
because there's another one as well.
There is another one, but this one's a little bit more feasible. This certainly could be a continuity. The girl who tells Lester when he goes looking for the campaign list of donor reports, it will be a couple 100 pages, she says. I think this is a little while back, though, isn't it?
This is season 1.
This is season 1, yeah. She is
when
Mrs.
they start
Donnelly's...
to follow the money.
Absolutely, yeah, when they start to do the paper trail stuff. Mrs. Donnelly's secretary in season 4. She is the secretary. So, it's kind of a paper-based job in both senses. You could easily see that Mrs. Donnelly's secretary moving between jobs like that. I don't know if that's the intention, but it's certainly a nice spot. I think that character is a lot more memorable, so I actually had noticed that one as well. But I'm sure Damon will have plenty more of insightful ones up his sleeve as we go through the show. Or we hope so.
Yeah, thanks for pointing them out, because I don't think I would have ever spotted that.
Yeah, the one with the Narcotics Anonymous rep is a really, really intense spot. Like, I would have never noticed that. So definitely keep enriching our knowledge. We appreciate it. And then we also heard this week from a new listener, Michael Barnes, who says, first of all, let me say thank you. It is so great to have a podcast dedicated to my favourite show. I love the in-depth analysis and cannot wait to rewatch the series for a second time after listening to the podcast. My friend and I make a set of zines called Rainy Day Activity Books. We take our favourite TV shows and movies and transform them into colouring activity books. If you let me know an address, I will send a couple of the newest issue, The Wire, your way. Thanks again for all the hard work, Michael. And lo and behold, this very day, actually, it's Wednesday, a Rainy Day Activity book set turned up at Alex's doorstep.
That's right. Came through the post box this morning. I did post a thing about it on the blog, just so you guys can see it. But we got a little package in a little it's like a little plastic envelope, and it had 2 activity books. And it's like a sort of, it almost seems like it's meant for children in a way. It has this kind of weird juxtaposition thing where it's like for children, but it's very mature content.
Yeah,
so as you can see in the photo, it's got this thing where it's like, can you help Clay Davis find his $20,000 kickback from Carcetti? Like, and it's like a sort of puzzle game to the money. It's good. And then there's lots of like sort of pen sketches of the characters, like as if they're meant to be coloured in. There's like an activity book from The Wire. There's also some badges with Clay Davis on it that say "she," and a little message and two little cards for the actual guys themselves. They're called Pizza Eaters, and it's like a sort of writing, scene making kind of group. So
awesome.
Yeah, it's kind of a cool little activity. Nice that they're doing that.
It was quite surreal to see that arrived this morning. Actually, I'll be taking a trip up to Liverpool soon to see the set myself, and I'll be looking forward to it. So, just a really great, I guess, symbol of what we've been doing so far and how much we're enjoying it, and glad that other people are enjoying it as well.
It shows the dedication that people have for this show. Like, it really means something.
Absolutely. So there you go, Alex. You've got your rainy days sorted from now on.
Yeah.
If you've done all your podcast notes, you can go on to the activity books.
If the weather doesn't work out, then I'll do a word search or something.
Yeah.
And as usual, I'm guessing you saw the bring it slightly off The Wire for the second. I'm guessing you saw the newest Game of Thrones episode, which is very intense.
Indeed, yeah. Again, we're going to have to dance around it, but I think intensity is a word that will nail it, as you say.
I feel like they've delivered something that a lot of people are waiting for, and very well paced. And yeah, a lot of emphasis on kind of one particular event, and it was just really well put together. Really quite, just it's hard to think of a better word than intense, really. That just kind of is, it captures it.
Because last year they had a similar episode involving a huge battle that actually went on longer. But that was done quite differently. That was done more measured, slower, so we actually got to see more of what was going on, but at the expense of this kind of feeling of intensity and just kind of madness. Whereas this time that they really went for that really frenetic, a shot every millisecond sort of kind of effect, which was really useful, I think.
And it was quite sort of going, there's a certain horror factor to it as well.
I know last week I expressed some kind of problems I had with the show, but I'm very much reassured by this recent episode that it's not kind of declining and there's just a dip here and there, and I think the quality of the show is remaining very high. And I think that the final shot particularly was just so chilling. Like, it was just an absolutely fantastic end.
Literally.
Yeah. Yeah.
You really come to appreciate the increase in production value for the show, probably mainly because of budget and just the amount of people they're bringing into it and the complexity of making it. You really appreciate that. Like in the earlier seasons, they would shy away from battles and there wasn't really any action scenes to speak of. And now we're getting a lot, each episode has quite a lot of action in it. So you can see that how the show is changing as the budget's increasing, complexity's increasing. They're able to throw in a bit more pizzazz. Which, in terms of getting your weekly fix, it really works.
Very, very true. Yeah, it's been a fantastic episode. Very much an episode of two halves. We had a very measured first half, very slow, just checking in with everyone that we need to keep everyone happy, I guess, and then just this fantastic. And it wasn't clear at first, was it? It was announced as just another scene in a big list of check-ins, and then you gradually realise that the scene gets longer and longer, and you're like, hang on a minute, this is a bit uneasy. What's going to happen here? And it really turns into one of the best scenes the show's ever put out.
Yeah.
So,
one of the best scenes in the whole show.
Absolutely.
Not even so much of a scene; it's just a whole kind of section of the episode.
It's kind of a mini movie, pretty much.
Yeah, definitely.
So,
had that feel to it.
Yeah. So I guess that's us dancing around Game of Thrones.
No, that's enough. I'm sure there's people that don't watch Game of Thrones or don't like Game of Thrones and just skip through these bits. So it's safe. You can come out now.
Yeah. Sorry for you avid watchers who haven't caught up and are putting us on mute right now. We'll go back to The Wire. Yeah. Have you seen anything else this week, or did you just catch up with Game of Thrones?
No, that was about it really. I did actually I caught a little bit of Suits. I don't know if you're aware of that.
Yes, I know of it. Yeah, I haven't really looked into it.
I don't really know a whole lot about it. I only caught it because my friend Army was watching it. And yeah, we just watched a little bit, and all these lawyers and very kind of fast talking, and I thought it was quite well written. It was kind of enjoyable. I'll have to check it out again, but if there's anybody that likes Suits and would recommend that I watch a little bit more of it, then it seemed kind of intriguing. Had a certain sense of humour to it. And having seen that sort of lawyer-based stuff done in Saul Goodman, it's obviously a very different style. I mean, Saul Goodman, Better Call Saul, I mean. Better Call Saul.
With Saul Goodman, yeah.
But yeah, I mean, he is that. But with Better Call Saul, it's a very more stylised way of presenting all of that lawyerly stuff. It's very dark and going for that underworld feel, whereas this is a bit more sort of corporate and very tight and lots of very very standard televisual drama, I suppose, but it's quite cleverly written. I don't know.
So
if anyone recommends it.
I mean, is it trying to depict the lawyer kind of profession quite realistically, or is it more?
It's going for a little bit more. Yeah,
it's a bit more tongue in cheek.
Yeah, it's not. I mean, I don't know enough about the profession to be able to say whether it's accurate or not, but it certainly seemed a bit more straight-laced. It wasn't like Better Call Saul, which can actually be a little bit zany at times. Like, it has a certain, like you say, certain tongue in cheek to it because of the nature of the character. Whereas this was felt a bit more serious. I mean, there are jokes in it, but it's trying to present a slightly more realistic portrayal of what it might actually be like a lawyer at this level, considering their circumstances.
Yeah. Okay, then, sure. Another one to add to the list, the long list.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm afraid I didn't manage to catch up with much either this week. It's been very busy. We might have more to discuss next week.
Watch some Have I Got News For You, which I haven't seen in ages as well. Saw it on iPlayer, stuck it on.
That's right. Mr. Gary Lineker making an appearance this week, did he? Yeah. That's all I caught of it, unfortunately, just his face.
The post-election one was great. I really enjoyed that one. I think that was with Joe Brand.
Oh, okay. Did you see the pre-election one with Charlie Brooker?
No, I didn't actually.
A roundup of the election campaign highlights. That was very, very funny.
I need to check that out.
Because I know how much we both love the format of Charlie Brooker's wipes, as they're called. So it just kind of...
They're very up and down, aren't they?
Yeah, I think they're overall pretty consistent.
This is Charlie Brooker's screen wipe for the uninitiated.
Yeah, absolutely. It's kind of I guess very... It's non-fiction. It's looking back on TV really and just mocking it essentially. And
it's a satirical take on TV news, and it's almost like a clip show mixed with Charlie Brooker's very cynical style of delivery.
Yeah, it's a very bleak outlook for television, but very, very funny. If any of you've seen Black Mirror, he's the guy who wrote Black Mirror, and I think maybe directed it as well.
I'm not sure, I can't remember if I said screen wipe or news wipe, because there's two, isn't there? Well, there's also there's one games wipe episode where he does about video games, but he does this news wipe one, which is news satire, and then then Screen Wipe, which is about TV programs, and that doesn't run anymore. But I remember when it first came out, I remember watching it and being like, this is actually pretty unique.
Yeah, and there's loads of episodes of it. I mean, they've all been amalgamated into this big Charlie Brooker's Wipe thing, Screen Wipe now, as you say, but it really goes back quite a few years, this show, and it never seems to run out of material, despite the huge number of episodes he's managed to come up with. So I think you can find most of them on YouTube as well. I'd definitely recommend having a little look.
Yeah, they're up there for sure. Worth checking out. Yeah. Although, if you're a viewer from the not a viewer, listener from the States, then it's maybe less interesting because it's all about British TV shows. And I guess if you're not familiar with kind of the kind of shows there's certain like in jokes and based on sort of knowing all the stars and whatnot. So
he does occasionally take quite big stabs at American TV.
He does, yeah.
Particularly a lot of stuff like American Idol. You can find endless points of shame for that show.
He talks about like My Super Sweet 16 and stuff like that, shows like that.
Just
which I'm sure have pretty much the same approach. You know, people probably think much the same thing about them in America as they do here. Like,
yeah.
It's just very trashy TV.
He just finds interesting ways to say it's trashy, really, and hilarious ways of it. So.
He describes it as like an Al-Qaeda recruitment video, doesn't he?
Yeah. That's the that's kind of the Charlie Brooker hallmark.
That's a taste.
That's his humour, really. That's kind of how it goes.
That's a taste.
Yeah. So he can be pretty extreme, but that's what makes it so funny. Yeah. Should we dive into our Wire recap?
Yeah, I'm going for the recap this week.
It's my turn again. Yep.
Are you? Is it your turn?
Sorry, it's not my turn, is it?
It's
I got both the episode number and the recap wrong. Yeah, it is your turn indeed. So
I didn't prepare for nothing, did I?
No. I didn't prepare either. I just for some reason thought I was on the recap. Another brain fart. I must be a little bit tired.
You've been partying too much.
Yeah, I was up rather late last night. Just a bit insomnia. So just sort of hit me this afternoon, and I was like, "Am I going to be able to get through this podcast?" I imagine so.
Fight through it. Power through it.
Yeah, I feel alright at the moment, so I'll survive until we finish in 3 hours.
Okay, let's crack on with this recap then. And we'll start with the politics this week, which is one of 5 sections. I was going to break it down a little bit more, but they ended up being very small. So it's 5 major sections. They're all pretty meaty. Barksdale organisation stuff is very meaty. There's a lot of stuff that goes on there this week. So we'll start with the politics. And we begin with Marla and Cedric Daniels as they attend a political event. And Tony Gray, Clay Davis, and Odell Watkins discuss the absence of Marla's opponent, Unetta Perkins. Watkins congratulates Gray for criticising the mayor through the police subcommittee. And after the event, Cedric and Marla have coffee and she raises the possibility of a reconciliation. Cedric tells Marla that he cannot promise any more than his continued support of her political career. Later, Daniels raises Marla's political aspirations in conversation with his new girlfriend Rhonda Perlman, telling her that he feels he owes Marla the supportive husband routine because she supported his career for so long. So that's kind of our opening politics bit, kind of a general bit, but mainly focused around Marla and Cedric. And interestingly enough, despite a lot of coldness from Marla, she's actually trying to creep back in here, and you can understand Cedric's reservations, I think. I think you can understand that he might want to be a little bit careful here. Just dropping right back into that situation that he was in before.
Yeah, I mean, it's Marla's turn to get dish some pain this time, and she wants to take him back, and it's really nice that Daniels doesn't hurt her by mentioning the fact that Ronnie has come along into his life. But he is still very happy to help her with the politics. There's this really selfless aspect to him that kind of transcends the new relationship. It did make me wonder why Marla was coming back to him. He hasn't been promoted beyond the rank he was when they broke up. Is it her seeing how loyal he is through his help, or is it desperately not wanting to risk her political climb and have the marriage intact rather than through kind of on a sheep's clothing?
That's the thing. If they rise to a certain level and then they have to do the breakup and that becomes some big news, as if it particularly matters that much. But to some people, it really does. So it's this whole game. It's the game.
It's tricky, but then again, as Daniel says, Marla only wants it for the election campaign. Once she wins, she's got nothing to prove anymore. So maybe her wanting to get back together is more of a long-term consideration for her.
Realises that sort of selfishness can only get you so far.
Yeah, it's a real kick in the teeth for her, and I'm firmly on Daniels' side. Like I always was on Team Daniels. It was a very harsh manoeuvre to kick him out based on ambition, or perceived ambition at the very least. So now she's kind of having the hens come home to roost.
We also have a little bit where the whole challenging Mayor Royce thing starts to gain a little bit more ground, as we have Watkins congratulating Gray for criticising the mayor. He's kind of talking about the city needing new blood, and sort of Gray getting his ideas about a potential rise for him. And Carcetti sees that as an opportunity later on about splitting the black vote. We'll come to that more later, but this is kind of the beginnings of the whole challenge against Royce.
They're really painting Odell Watkins as a bigwig here, aren't they? It's kind of a scene to elevate his position as kind of the voice of reason and the honest voice within the political scene in Baltimore.
It does begin to get a bit of a kingmaker air around him.
Absolutely, everyone really
who he supports has all the kind of power.
Absolutely, and everyone around him really kind of takes what he says to heart and sees it as the gospel, really. Particularly Tony Gray, who really gleaned some excitement from his comments about Royce. So, and again, it's nice to see Marla there with Daniels, and we get to, a little bit more on the whole very subtle backplot about Unetta versus Marla fighting for the 11th district seat, I think. So it's good to see that. And of course, though, Clay Davis is there. He's on the other side of the fence. Apparently, Royce is the definition of incumbent. So we're going to see who gets proved wrong, at least.
So let's move on to the next section.
Yeah.
So Carcetti plays another squash game with Gray, and Gray raises the possibility of someone running against Royce. They skirt around the issue of who, and Carcetti suggests that only a black person could win a mayoral race in Baltimore. And Carcetti then returns home to his wife and children for dinner. Later, Carcetti meets formally with Teresa D'Agostino to ask her to run his campaign a second time. She again questions the possibility of a white mayor of Baltimore. Carcetti reasons that with Gray thinking about running, the black vote will be split, and he also brags about having Burrell as an inside source within the police department. So just a little bit here.
Carcetti and Tony playing their squash/racquetball again. And I did just check; they are definitely different sports, and they're both the only racket sports that are played indoors. They just have slightly different sets of rules and ways of scoring. So that's generally the consensus on those two. As far as Tony and Carcetti playing it, we see Carcetti losing yet again. As I think Tony is the one who's triumphing at the moment. And we see him really forming his own aspirations, which is clearly in line with Carcetti's goals as well. And wanting, of course, as we mentioned with Terry, that the black vote needs to be split if Carcetti's going to have any chance of winning the election.
Yeah, I think you've mentioned before about the significance of the sporting events that goes on in the show. It seems like there's a small connection between what's going on with Carcetti here and the racquetball game.
Definitely. Although, in the long run, Tommy is definitely winning here. We can already see that despite their close friendship, Tony Gray is already a product of Carcetti's manipulation. Carcetti's not really happy that... Well, he is happy that he's running for mayor, but certainly not at the expense of his mayoral campaign. It's just there to enhance his, and we can already see early on that Tony Gray just completely isn't aware of this, and it's really going to come and bite them later on.
Yep. Right, let's do this final small section here, unless you want to fill in anything else about that.
Yep. Does this include the bit where Tommy goes to see his wife and children for dinner? Is that right?
Yes, that's right. Yeah, we had the little bit where he's We see him almost lose his temper a little bit when he finds, toast inside the VCR.
Yeah.
That dates it,
heavily
having
of
a
his,
VCR
of his
player.
absence, yeah. Very true. And shoving pieces of toast in there, that's pretty horrid. But they just wanted to keep it warm before he came home. Must be a bit of a commonplace problem in their house. But yeah, it's kind of not the greatest. The way he just kind of rolls in through the door, wonders where the food is, and then goes over to the telly and tries to find footage of himself, giving the city food for thought.
We've shown that he has a bit of a very bold streak in him, but when he's in that situation, we see a little bit more of the genuine family man from Carcetti, because so far it's all been about posing as the family man when he's gone to these events and Jen and his kids have been there and then they disappear off to let him do his thing. But on this, it's a little bit more, it's a little bit more genuine. Yeah. Even though he does have that little streak at the beginning, we see the real happy-go-lucky element to Carcetti. He's still got a bit of a family man in him.
Definitely, yeah. It's good to see these domestic scenes, as we always say, since they're so short in supply. Yeah, and I assume it doesn't include the bit with Royce and Coleman Parker.
We're going to do that one now, just that
Okay.
short bit there. So, Mayor Royce and his Chief of Staff, Coleman Parker, meet with Irvin Burrell about the rising murder rate and suggest that he may not stay as commissioner unless he can control it. So you just wanted to separate this little bit. It feels the whole thing is very bizarre, isn't it? This notion of promising a number of murders. It just seems even more strange here when Royce says it. You promised me it would be such and such, as if it's something that they can control. It reminds me of the deacon's comment to Bunny about sweeping leaves on a windy day.
Mm. Exactly, yeah. They can certainly lock up people and possibly prevent, drug transactions. But in terms of murders, their job is to, investigate the murder post-murder. The concept that they can actually intervene before someone decides to pull a trigger is pretty ridiculous. The police aren't really omnipresent, so it is absolutely ridiculous when you really analyse what's being spoken about here. And they're just seeing it completely from a numbers politics perspective without any insight into how policing works. And Burrell doesn't challenge that doesn't challenge them on that at all, which is very strange. It would be quite a strong line of argument, to be honest. But
it gives you an inroad to how the administration measures success purely by the numbers and purely by the stats. It's very cold and metric, and it doesn't really look at what the problems are and how they can be solved. It's just, can we get everything lower?
Yeah.
Here, these are the undesirable things. The undesirable things don't cease to be undesirable, and they can only be made better by being lower. And it's this very sort of strange, very obtuse way of approaching the situation, and the way he's dismissive of Burrell, just like, well, if you don't get the numbers lower, you can't stay.
Yeah.
Not much of an administration if it's constantly chucking people out, and that mirrors what's going on with Comstat as well, with Burrell's delivering exactly the same thing to the people below him. It's almost like he's learning that's how the system works and delivering it to those under him as he's had it delivered from Royce. If you can't do the job, then we'll just get rid of you and we'll find someone who can.
Definitely, yeah. He's I think Burrell is playing the game that's most rigged of all in the whole city, really.
Kind of feel for the guy sometimes. He really is stuck right in the middle.
He's a pretty horrible guy, but you can tell it's a product of where he is that makes him that way, and there'd be very little other way to behave in that role, really.
Yeah.
You constantly have to be, defend your actions, and in most cases you aren't responsible for what happens out on the streets there, but it's always going to fall on you, and it's a very, very compromising position to be in. So for all the aspirations people have to climb that ladder, it really does get pretty horrible at the top there.
It's strange how they want to cling hold of this power that caused them so much sort of discomfort and misfortune.
Yeah, it's just this perceived notion of the lifestyle that comes with that pay packet, I guess, and the seniority you feel, that kind of power trip, but it really doesn't add up as the show shows us, really. It's a bit of a lie.
So that's our politics section.
Yeah.
Do you want to add anything else about the politics in this episode? It's slightly smaller than usual, it feels.
Yeah, I mean, the politics is never a massive element of it yet, is it? Carcetti's certainly sort of starting off his campaign. I guess we just see mainly that Terry is now on the other side of the fence. She's clearly pleased with the efforts that Tommy's made. He gives a number of reasons why it's feasible for him to become mayor. Not all of them I can recall. But he particularly mentions how he's got Burrell in his pocket, which is a very useful element of his rise. And of course the fact that he's managed to befriend Tony and get him involved in running for mayor as well, which is a very important part of their splitting the vote. So the smile that Terry gives him really is quite telling that they are about to enter this race. It's definitely on.
And she finishes with the one thing that he hasn't guaranteed yet, which is raising a lot of money.
Yeah. And you feel that Carcetti certainly doesn't have a plan for that, but he knows that it will happen somehow.
He seems very confident. He's got that
confidence. He's got that kind of, just that cocksure element about him.
And obviously on rewatch, you appreciate how it... you wouldn't be smiling so much if you knew what was coming, because later on in season 4, we see him really, really struggling to get that money.
Yeah. Like the first 2 episodes of season 4, like it's killing him. Like all this, not only raising the money, but also having to do the campaigning in between. Because we see that the very worst part of his campaign is when he has to phone up the fundraisers and beg them for the maximum allowable donation, and then send them round some bailiffs to make sure they actually pay it. So it does get very, very morally questionable as you go through it. But I guess it has to be done for those ad breaks and the rest of it.
Right, shall we move on to Homicide?
Yeah. Absolutely.
Another sort of fairly short section here. First part, we're starting with Bunk, who gives a report detailing his episodes to retrieve Dozerman's weapon to Jay Landsman as a way to deflect the attention of their superiors. Bunk insists that he will work on the double homicide of Tosha and Tank rather than wasting time on the service weapon, and Landsman finally agrees with him. Bunk goes to interview Tosha's family and is direct about her involvement in the shootout and with Omar Little. He asks them to put Omar in touch with him so that he can tell his story. The word gets back to Omar through Kimmy, and she gives him Bunk's card. Omar tells Kimmy to let him handle the police. And later, Omar catches up with Bruiser, the witness who identified him to Bunk at a card game, and convinces him to change his story.
Yeah, so as we mentioned last week, where Landsman turns up to get him to force him to carry on, Landsman somewhat relents here, which is nice. Not verbally, but there's kind of an idea that he gets it, that this is just a stupid goose chase. And Bunk giving him the booklet with all that heroic work he's carried out.
Yeah, it's a bit of a decoy for a section. I guess Landsman realises, he knows how the game's played. I guess if he can present a little bit of paperwork on it and make it look like something is happening, then it just buys them a little bit of time. And maybe, I guess they're hoping that it might show up at some point. They don't really seem to have much of a long-term plan, but it frees up Bunk's time to do that double. Yeah,
definitely. So it's odd that he seemed surprised that he did all of that work, though, because he was chivying him every 5 minutes. So the fact that he's done lots of investigation shouldn't be any surprise to him. But I guess it really makes its point that he's been all over the city under every haystack, and it ain't there.
And then he goes to interview Tosha's family, who we see very briefly. They're clearly not up for cooperating in much of a way.
Yeah, this is this is an unironically heroic work finally, and he's really raising the pressure here at Tosha's folks' home, which is pretty brutal because they're clearly still in mourning. Like, it's an uncomfortable scene at best.
I guess he's going for that impact.
Yeah,
he's
it's a
not
logical
going in
way
there to make friends.
He wants to push the truth out, and you really need to do this, I guess, to kind of eke it out at this point. So yeah, a really nicely handled moment there for Bunk. He's finally being put to good use.
Well, we do see that one of the techniques that they use when they're talking to people and interrogating people and trying to get information out of them for whatever reason, that trying to get a rise out of the opponent is a tactic that's often used to kind of like build them up so that they get riled up, and then they'll release something. They'll release some little bit of information. You can sort of ride on that. We see it in quite a few occasions. We see Herc trying it really badly on Randy later on in season 4. Just say you were there.
Shit.
It's not quite how it works.
Oh dear.
So yeah, he gives it a try on Tosha's families here, but they're
they're sort of in a mixture of obviously distraught about the death and not exactly going to be cooperating with the police anytime soon.
Yeah, there's that culture that really is prevalent along the community that gets involved as well, as you say. Yeah, so it's pretty good, but it doesn't take long before Kimmy gets word of Bunk's visit and lets Omar know about it, which leads to far more friction between her and Dante. They're really not on good terms at the moment, following Tosha's death, which must have been some time ago now. So yeah, you can see that things are still pretty kind of down key, and then they're not doing these drug busts anymore. They seem to be taking some time off and mourning themselves.
Doing a lot of bickering about it.
Bickering and watching David Simon shows, and because they were watching Oz on the telly there, which was David Simon's first HBO show, I believe.
To be honest, I don't really know anything about it.
Actually, let me just... I've seen, I think, the first season of Oz. But I don't think... Sorry, I do take it back. That's not David Simon's show, but it is HBO's first long-form drama.
Okay.
Which came out in 96 or 97. And it involves quite a few actor Wire alumni in there. But it's set in a prison. It's quite a revered show, actually. As with a lot of HBO shows, there wasn't a lot of critical acclaim or viewer interest, but it's kind of stood the test of time, and a lot of people know it. And I think I quite enjoyed the first season. So that certainly beat The Sopranos to it. A lot of people think of The Sopranos as the starting point for HBO, but there was one show that got in there first. So,
all right. I don't really know anything about it, to be honest with you.
Yeah, there's Herc's in it. Carver's in it, I believe. So hit it up if you can.
Is it going on that list again? That list of things that will never happen?
We should post our list on the. I'm sure we'll have a much longer list by the time we finish this podcast. So we should post a list on the blog. But Omar is of course watching Oz. That's where we're actually at the moment, and there's just a lot of tension going down.
And then he goes back to Bruiser. We're not entirely sure how much of when Bruiser was talking to Bunk, how much was true and how much was false. I mean, the guy seems pretty squinty, but obviously identifies Omar, and he's proved that he's able to identify it. But obviously not good enough eyesight to notice that he has a huge scar on his face, apparently.
Or I mean, maybe he was being coy for Bunk.
Well, that's what I was thinking. Yeah, maybe he was just trying to be a little bit, withholding a bit of information.
Yeah,
given into that culture. Even if you're going to help the police, don't give them all the answers.
Yeah, I think this scene shows Bruiser in a different light. It shows that he's got a lot more of a screwed-on head than we saw last time. So
he comes across as a bit of a dope.
I think he was playing up for Bunk, really. He really didn't want to give away too much.
He do.
So it's nice to see that double aspect to him, even if he is such a minor character.
Yeah, that's true.
And this leads us to a very revered, heavily loved scene, actually, with Bunk and Omar on the bench.
Yes, let's come on to this bit. So Omar contacts Bunk to invite him to a meeting. When Omar tells Bunk there is no victim in the case of the shooting and implies that Bruiser has changed his story, Bunk flies into a rage. He talks about their shared past at Edmondson High School. And Bunk says that the sense of community in their neighbourhoods and the concern for the dead is all but gone. So yeah, like you say, this is a very popular scene.
Yeah, and it's the third or fourth time just in this episode that the olden days are mentioned. The old lady brings up the old days in the district that Colvin speaks to, and then we also have it's almost like a flashback style at the start of the episode where there's this kind of scene, this kind of idealistic scene of a community in the ghetto where everyone's selling lemonade and playing on the street and hanging up washing and tending gardens. It kind of feels like that was a bit of a theme of this episode following the establishment of Amsterdam, now that everyone can get back to work. And they really wanted to make it hit home in this conversation. And yeah, just absolutely fantastic acting on both sides, and good to see Bunk really having an emotional element in the show. I think he's very much our kind of routine homicide guy, and he's been a bit of a lone wolf most of the time. And it's good to see that he really has some attachment to the show in other ways.
Yeah, it gets a little bit more consistent like that in season 5 when he clashes with McNulty quite a bit. There's a bit more intensity there, but this is the one scene in the early seasons where Bunk really kind of has a bit of an emotional moment. He does get very angry with Omar and has that sort of shadow boxing moment. I'm not really sure what that was. That was a bit strange, but it's obviously getting quite intense there. And it's nice that when the show talks about these good old days or the old days, it doesn't try to glorify them too much. The show is still stating that even back then we knew that there were people that were bad, and but there was a sense of honor in it, and we've seen that with Cutty as well when he approaches fruit with the package.
Yeah,
he gets that sense that normally if it got stolen you'd give them the report number and all that sort of stuff, and that's totally alien to fruit. These aren't the old days anymore. They're not trying to deny that there wasn't any crime or there wasn't any seriously immoral things going down, but there was a strange honor in it all, and it's nice that the show doesn't try to coat this. Things were wonderful back then, and now they've all become shit. Like, it's trying to create a much more realistic portrayal of how times have changed.
Yeah.
Whilst still portraying that same kind of, I guess, the same idea, like Bunk says, how far we've fallen. It's able to portray that idea without being too cliched.
Certainly, and I think Avon coming out of prison this episode as well is a good indication of that old school honour or morality, particularly in that scene that we'll get to. And I don't want to talk about it too early because there's so much to talk about, but the Cutty scene at the end, where he's let off the hook in this really uncharacteristic of the street kind of mercy, it really kind of feeds into this idea that they used to have this code of honour and everything was done for a reason. So it really nice theme for the episode, and really epitomised here in the scene with Omar and Bunk on the bench.
I'm just going to point this out as well, because I was going to say something, but then I stopped, because when you were talking, we just received an email.
Whoa.
So I'm going to take the opportunity
Live Listeners Corner.
Yeah. I'm going to take this opportunity, seeing as it is such a unique moment, to cut in right at the end of our homicide section with a bit of extra Listeners Corner. And do you remember Paddy, who contacted us a little while, our friend from Ireland in West Cork?
Yes. Indeed, yeah.
So yeah, he was just enjoying the show, and he sent us an email about 5 minutes ago saying, "The only negative thing I've ever heard about The Wire is a friend of mine complains complains bitterly how unrealistic it is for McNulty to have such a shredded body when he's an alcoholic." Which is an interesting comment. I don't know. I'm not sure I would describe McNulty as shredded. Not really been paying attention too much to that. Cedric Daniels, there's your shredded man. Cedric Daniels is a machine. A unit, I believe the expression is.
Yeah, he doesn't look real, does he? Like he just looks like a real waxwork.
He looks like a Ken doll or something, doesn't he? Like,
it's incredible. Yeah, and we get to see quite a lot of him really accentuating those abs. Well, this episode particularly, there's that scene with Ronnie, isn't it, where he's just sort of standing lit up in the moonlight, these ridiculous muscles.
Paddy also asks, P.S. Any hint on what the best Game of Thrones podcast is? Thanks. What's the best Game of Thrones podcast, Toby?
I'm sure there's so many out there. I kind of listen to two regularly.
One of them has got to be
I can fit in.
A pod of casts.
That's right, a pod of casts. The Game of Thrones podcast. Yeah, just search pod of casts. I think it's one of the most popular on iTunes.
TVcritic.org. That's pretty good.
That's right. Robin Pearson and Roberto Suarez are the hosts, and it's a classic setup where one has the book knowledge and one doesn't, so it can lead to interesting discussions and obviously kind of semi hints, kind of speak to the guy who doesn't understand it. So or to the one without the knowledge. So that certainly creates for a better dynamic. And there's also another podcast where they've got that set up as well, which is the Cast of Kings, with David Chen and Joanna Robinson. And they kind of go through. It's a very similar format for each. And yeah, they just sort of spend an hour each week sort of retreading the ground. And I think if you like or intrigued by how the books are different, I think A Cast of Kings is a better one to go for. They certainly really tread on all the comparisons here, and this season particularly, there's just nothing on the books, or very little that's actually in the books still in the show. It's really cut itself off from the canon of the books completely. So that's kind of an interesting discussion that they've been having about that. And of course, you can imagine that the Sansa-based episode was a real lengthy discussion, very controversial for podcast discussers. So,
but yeah, that's a bit of live listeners' corners there. So thanks for that, buddy.
Sorry, that was a bit of a lengthy review of Game of Thrones podcasts.
But yeah, there's your option. A little bit of a cut in the middle there.
Yeah.
So yeah, anything else to say about this scene with Omar and Bunk? Bringing us back to that before we move on. Other than the nice lingering shot on the spit on Omar's chin.
Yeah, I mean, Bodhi versus Omar on the whole spitting thing. Do you take a side?
Oh, Bodhi's got it down. Like, that's some expert spitting right there. Omar's is just done as a kind of sign of disrespect more than anything. It's a very kind of just big, hawked up kind of blob. Whereas Bodhi is going for a little more style. He's got a through the teeth kind of laser thing going on.
Yeah, it's certainly far more refined with Bodhi. I'm just impressed with Omar's capacity for spit. It just seems to be a whole pool that comes out. But
Any man who's always using something as big as a shotgun better have the same output in his spit, I guess. It's going for that large bore, you know?
Yeah, could have killed a man. No doubt. But yeah, I was impressed by the spit, and just kind of the dangling dribble. Just kind of really goes with the contempt he has right there.
Yeah, he's just sat there, just kind of not even caring, just leaving it there. Like, I'm quite happy to spit in disrespect and leave it there, not even going to look at you.
Yeah,
it's interesting as well. I mean, Omar is always shown as, for all of his flaws, he is a very kind of enjoyable, lovable character. But he's not. It's one of the few times where a character who's generally very likable, Bunk, really has disrespect for another character that's very likable. It's like when we have Freeman and McNulty, when they clash together. There's something about it as the viewer, you really kind of almost cringe a little bit, where you see these characters that you really like, really making very strong points against each other and really disrespecting one another. And we have that here with Bunk and Omar for sure. And it's surprising for Omar, because Omar is always kind of on top. He always has these moments. Like we mentioned in the battle scene, it's a rare moment of weakness. This feels like another one. It feels like Bunk really has kind of put him in his place a little bit there.
Definitely, yeah. And you get the sense that Omar understands himself to be the good guy on the street. Like, he's helping the community. He's getting rid of the bad guys. And all of a sudden, this other perspective comes along that makes a lot of sense. And I think most viewers probably agree with Bunk's sentiment at that point in time. It certainly cuts close home for Omar, who suddenly can see himself as the bad guy, and it really doesn't sit well with him at all. And you can tell he's not spitting because he rejects what he's saying. That there's certainly a belief that there's some truth there, but it's a really difficult truth for him to stomach.
It's almost like he's got to get it out. He doesn't want him in him.
Yeah, he's just going to go back to being a rip and run with all the positive aspects, and forget about the carnage I might be causing.
Right, so that's our homicide section.
Yep.
Let's come on to another smaller one before we get to the really big stuff, and that's the Western District. So trade in Amsterdam is thriving, but Major Colvin insists that his men crack down hard on any remaining drug crews operating outside the tolerance zones. He gives Ellis Carver free rein to use any force necessary to make the drug dealers relocate. The Drug Enforcement unit tows cars, delivers brutal beatings and pepper sprayings, throws away shoes and drives dealers out into the countryside to make their point. Colvin finds his district safer with honest people back out on the corners again, but the reality of the tolerance zones is shocking. He notices one resident remaining in the Amsterdam zone, and he offers her a chance to relocate as part of a program to move people out of the areas affected by the drug trade. She refuses to move and asks why he can't deal with the drug problem instead of moving her. Colvin then approaches Raymond Forster with the paperwork for the move, telling him that the woman is a witness in a drug case, and Forster reluctantly signs it. So yeah, that's a sort of major, just a major bit around what's going on in Amsterdam this week, and we get a perspective on the necessary evil of Amsterdam, and how, in order to try and bring about this major change, and we've talked a lot about reform in this season, how it is a big theme, about how if you want to make these changes, you've really got to go through quite a painful process, and there is a real problem with what he's doing there. He's giving free rein to these people who have spent so much time, especially in the Western District. We know all about the Western District, where he's saying you've got free rein to do whatever it is you need to do to move them. It's absolutely ripe for abuse, and we see it hit right here. They're just really wailing on him, going full speed on these people just for the sake of moving them into this zone, and you start to wonder a little bit whether all this brutality is really worth it in the end.
Yep. But it does need a strict enforcement policy if it's going to work in the long run.
Well, that's it, isn't it? You're trying to give people a certain freedom by forcing them to be free. By like saying, this is better for you, you have to do it. Now you are free. It's a strange thing, isn't it?
Yeah, it's very, very weird, but you can understand why. It's perhaps hard to see Colvin as the delegator in this instance, like giving them permission to go wild on these boys up until they can't walk out of the ER.
Yeah, he's really sort of mandating quite a serious swathe of police brutality.
I will back you up through all this abuse as long as you get them onto my patch. It's really not characteristic of Colvin, and
well, he can't afford to hang around, I guess. He knows he needs results. He knows he needs to show something for it quickly. Otherwise, it's going to collapse very, very quickly.
So it really is a real pragmatic move for him, and it's nice that he's got he's all the way in the deep end, and he's not kind of pussying out at all. So as painful as it is, it can be quite fun to watch in the opening kind of montage. We have the pepper spray moment. That's not Colvin. It's come from Colvin's direct orders, but that's a pretty big abuse of that kind of
that's outrageous
idea. It's insane.
As Carver says.
Yeah.
But
the lengths that need to be gone.
We see a little bit more Sani as well, don't we?
Yeah, it's good to see him getting involved with the enforcement, and I love the way the Wire brings characters back in ways we wouldn't necessarily expect. And because there is a bit of a focus on the street policing that Sani moved to, we now get a bit of action with him, and he helps Aaron Caster bring a big bunch of them out to the edge of the state by the looks of it.
Yeah.
And
let's talk about next time it'll be. Doesn't he say next time it'll be West Virginia or something?
That's right. Yeah, it's still Maryland right now, and you need to go south the other way from the North Star. So I would like to see a little road trip mini season as we learn about these hoppers on the way back to Baltimore. That could take a good, I don't know how long, a few weeks. Do you reckon? But,
I always wonder if Sant'Angelo ever went back to Madame LaRue. Considering his success, albeit a confusing one last time, because obviously we don't really see much more of him again. I always wonder if he ever ended up considering that a reliable source after his success. So this must really work.
Yeah, he left Homicide pretty quickly, so maybe he ran out of hope with her.
Yeah. But he said something like, he almost seemed to believe it, didn't he? He was just like, he couldn't understand why a different case had been solved. It was McNulty's, because wasn't it McNulty basically does the work for him through Omar.
Omar is like giving away murders that he can remember, yeah, and just one of them happens to be Santi's, so it's it's fantastically well done. And Santi for a second believes it, but I think he's a little bit smarter than that. So he knows that it's going to be patrol that keeps him happy, not the Dunkers.
So yeah, then we come to the section with I suppose we have the little section with the resident who
That's
is still
right,
on
yeah.
the street. She doesn't want to go anywhere. And she obviously hits home for Colvin, who, like Omar, is getting a little bit of a beating on his otherwise well-intentioned principles, talking about why he can't solve the actual drug problem itself rather than, why can't he solve the problem outside the door rather than having to move her? Which, from her perspective, is perfectly valid. You know, she was always living there, so... But then again, we see that it stems from something very minor, which is basically a miscommunication. I mean, Mello doesn't seem that bothered at all. He's just like, Mister. He's almost like a bit of a cartoon character sometimes, isn't he? Like,
Yeah,
with his
yeah,
big
exactly.
bushy mustache, and he just kind of shrugs and rolls his eyes. Like, he doesn't seem
Yeah,
that
definitely.
bothered about it.
Yeah, certainly. So it was a pretty intense, and it was nice that they set that up last episode, so that when we see her really battling with these drug dealers this time, it does make sense. It doesn't raise any questions, and she really does have to deal with some horror, like some absolute horror on her doorstep, and it's something that the start of the episode, just after the credits, tries to show us the other side of. You know, away from these zones, the city's starting to come back into a community that functions properly. The weather seems a bit nicer than usual. People are hanging up their clothes. There's lemonade stands being set up. People are riding scooters around. People maintaining their gardens. And it's something that we never again are shown in The Wire, I don't think. This kind of ideal community. It's not something The Wire likes to dwell on much, but it reminds me a lot of the flashbacks in the show The Corner. I don't think have you watched that? You haven't watched that, Alex, have you? But it's the...
I think I've watched a little bit of it.
A little
I
bit
watched
of
the
it,
first
yeah.
episode, maybe.
You may have seen the flashbacks then. There's little bits where they cut back to like the 1960s, and you get to see the same streets, but back how they were then, when there was this community that existed and functioned properly, and you know the community was employed and successful, and the whole palette was lifted. Like there was a lot more colour in the scenes, and it just reminded me of that a little bit, and particularly coming off that montage at the start before the credits, it was like a real contrast there that they're really drawing between the hell of Amsterdam and the freedom of everywhere else to enjoy not being in that hell. So it was quite nice to see that before the episode kicked off. And
Nice
then, of
little
course,
point as well being made by obviously back in Amsterdam, where they've got so many people stood around trying to sell all the same products, and we hear some new names for the products as well. And one of them is landfill. And it's kind of nice that this suggestion of Amsterdam was the dumping ground for the undesirables of the city, trying to get them all in one place. Try out some of the landfill, because there's plenty of it around here, you know.
And Amsterdam it's huge, isn't it? Already, like it's really full up as a district, and I guess that's what that opening montage does. It helps us go through, kind of fast forward in time without it breaking the overall flow of the episode.
Yeah.
And they often use that on a few occasions. For example, the Prez montage in season 2 is quite a memorable one. So clearly, I mean, we saw last episode it was very quiet. It was really starting up, but we get the sense that it would have taken weeks and weeks for it to grow to this sort of level, and for people to not, suspect the police of foul play. And as you're mentioning, it now leads to the point where people are naming drugs after the new zone. So it has to have been a success at this point.
And then finally, with Colonel Forster, Colvin plays the game with him, tells him that it's she's a witness in a drug case. So.
Yeah, that was really clever, actually. It was because I really felt Colvin's annoyance and kind of helplessness when she was like, "You tell me you've got a program for me moving somewhere, but you ain't got a program for what's going on outside my door." And you're like, you can kind of really empathise with the irony of that, and the fact that he really can't answer that question honestly at all to her, and the fact that he came up with this kind of witness statement, and then was able to link that to the current media interest with witnesses getting clipped.
Exactly, yeah.
Was really really quite opportunistic of him, and it really seemed to work with Forster, who really begrudgingly signed it off and got her sorted. So that was a nice success story and very good work from Colvin.
Yeah, reasonable to expect that someone of his experience would know how to pull a little stunt like that. He clearly understands more than enough about how the how the whole game inside the police works. So yeah, it's he's able to take everything into his advantage, despite the fact that otherwise had pretty much no luck trying to get it to move.
Yeah, definitely.
So, good move.
Yeah, and it was also really nice. There's that transition as we see Colvin leave the lady's house, don't we? From Bodhi's perspective and then Stringer's perspective. That was just one of the really nice transitions that stood out for me. Going through.
Yeah, that's nice. There's one very small bit left for the Western District. We have Rules phoning Colvin about the shootout at Mount and Fayette, angry that Colvin has little to tell him. Carver is also unable, again, to give Colvin any information about which gangs might have been involved. So just a very, very small bit there. And I think the Wire is very sort of slowly putting in these little bits between Colvin and Carver. There's almost a paternal element of disappointment from Colvin whenever he has these moments with Carver, and Carver always looks very sheepish and very sorry that he's not been able to help. He clearly wants to be of some use, but he's so accustomed to the classic Western District way that obtaining all this information that Colvin expects is not something that has ever been expected of Carver. Yeah. So, he's just not able to help, even though we can tell just purely from his expression, his reaction to Colvin, that he does want to help. And we see the idealism in Carver that becomes stronger and stronger as it goes throughout the show. We see him try to make a concerted effort to embody a more, a leader, really. Yeah.
And I thought by this point in the series we'd have had the talk between Carver and Colvin, but clearly they're building up to that over a long period, which makes sense. So I imagine
just hinting at it here and there. It's a lot more tastefully done as it builds up.
Definitely, yeah. So that's good. And we see here that Colvin's really desperate for these answers because he's just been informed of these dropping of the bodies as a result of the Barksdale-Stanfield war that's kicking off. And suddenly his district has been quiet for a while. The East Baltimore has been the focus, as we saw earlier in the season, and now it's going to be his turn to possibly face being the target practice in Comstat, and he needs these answers right now. So it's pretty awesome how it all links up. And then, of course, McNulty comes along and adds a further link to this tale when he uses Colvin's kind of political pressure to then change the target of the detail. So it's Barksdale, Western District, and Homicide all in bed together and kind of changing the story, all through political moves. So it's very, very cleverly done.
Yeah. Right, that's the Western District. If there's nothing else you want to add, then we can move on to the massive, massive section on the Barksdale organisation.
Let's do it.
Let's start with Avon and Stringer, who are visiting their development site and are dismayed to find costs spiralling. Avon puts the blame with their contractor, telling him that he's supposed to have the expertise to avoid these problems. But Andy Krawcheck deflects the accusation by saying that cost overruns are the nature of the business. That's our first little bit.
Krawcheck constantly making comments about prices going up, yeah. Steel, gutting costs. And we see Stringer just accepting that these are correct. There's no kind of attempt to challenge them. And he'll just continue to pay more. He's got the money for it. And it's not clear whether this is all part of the abuse. I'm not sure if it's just Clay Davis that took him for a ride, or maybe Krawcheck did as well. I'm sure.
No, Krawcheck definitely does. He's definitely taken him here. I mean, what's interesting is that Stringer has all of this money. He has kind of financial capital, but what he doesn't have when he's trying to enter this new arena is the sort of experience in political capital to withstand this kind of diddling, as it were, at the hand of Krawcheck. I mean, what can he say to Krawcheck? He needs him. He doesn't have anyone else. He's his man. He's not. There's not really anything that Stringer can say to get riled up here and trying to get the results. He has to accept it. He has no other option. So for all of Stringer's experience and his planning and his money, when he's tried to enter this totally new arena, we see that he has to learn to be a novice again, and he's not prepared for that at all. He's become so assured of himself in his position with the Barksdale organisation, especially having essentially become the caretaker head of it in quite some time. He's just he's not ready to reach that level of inferiority again.
There's just this kind of naivety that's going with him, isn't it? It's the idea that money is the key to your credibility, rather than having money and knowing when to spend it as being the credibility. It's just kind of the power comes from the money alone, and it really doesn't.
He straight up says that to Avon, doesn't he?
Yeah.
He straight up says, he pretty much says, if we have enough money, we can run this place. We can run the city just on the money. We can run the
city, yeah.
Yeah. Like the whole of
Baltimore. Real ambition there, yeah.
I mean, it sounds very sort of big ideas and really planning and very motivated, and it's in reality it's totally ludicrous. It's laughably sort of misguided.
Yeah. It's just kind of blind ambition, a little bit like climbing that ladder.
I'm going to run this town. It makes it sound kind of serious when Idris Elba is saying it as Stringer. I guess it comes out nice, but when you really look at what he's saying, it's totally preposterous.
And as heartwarming as Stringer's attempts to become this businessman are, it's moments like this when we really see the flip side, Avon, as the smarter one of the two, particularly when he's the one there with Krawcheck challenging them on these cost increases. He's the one who says, look, you're painting this as a nature of the business, when it's really just you fucking up and not complying with what you promised us. And he makes a very good point there. If you want to be someone in business, you need to make those sort of comments and challenge people like that. And Stringer's just blindly coughing up because that's he's trusted someone to know the business better than he does.
Strangely, in that moment, even though Avon says later on that he's not a suit-wearing businessman like Stringer, in that moment he actually has more business nous, because it's by challenging them that they may actually get a better advantage for themselves in terms of their money. Yeah. Stringer, by being totally placated by Krawcheck, is the one losing out here, and that's not exactly showing a particularly strong business-like focus.
Absolutely. So it's good to see the way the two of them deal with that there. And just general Avon's boredom with the whole thing. Just wearing the hard hat and just not being inspired whatsoever. And
he just leaves. He's like, I'm going.
Yeah. And Stringer's not necessarily interested either. He's just waiting. Like, he wants his condo built and he wants someone living in there and him making money on the top. Like that. That's kind of what he's leaning towards. So there's not really any interest from either of them. But it's good to see how their interests differ.
Yeah, a lot of shows of difference between Avon and Stringer here.
Yeah.
Well, let's move on to the next bit. A bit more Avon and Stringer, and they're with Slim Charles this time to survey some territory. Avon questions why they don't have a crew near Marlowe's, and Stringer tells them there was a setback. Slim Charles reveals that the crew was run off by Marlowe, and Avon is dismayed that they're conceding the best territory without a fight. Later, Stringer tries to dissuade Avon of the need to fight for territory, and Avon tells Stringer that he is just a gangster, not a businessman, and he wants his corners. Yeah, getting a little bit more friction. I think Stringer is starting to look a bit uncomfortable as he realises that the situation is being seen by Avon for real, and that he's clearly not very happy about it. He has to try and Stringer has to try and maintain a certain status quo from before, otherwise he's going to risk the ire of Avon.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is kind of, I guess, quite a predictable scene following Avon's release. There's the mandatory bit where they go and survey the scene and see what's going on since he's been away, and getting a lay of the land. And Stringer is not up front with Slim and Avon. He's in the back seat. There's clearly some imagery going on there, and we see Slim is just an awkward a spot as Stringer is, with deciding whose loyalty to follow here. Like, he's been with Stringer ever since joining the Barksdales, I imagine, and he knows that Avon's the boss man, and he's kind of caught between the two sides completely, and he eventually seems to go with Avon here, and Stringer really does distance himself at this point. So,
well, Slim Charles has got to be one of the sort of smartest characters in a way. He's got his head in the game.
Yeah.
Pun definitely intended. He knows where his loyalties lies. He's got it kind of figured out. He's able to rise without really coming into any conflict with anyone, really. Unless it was, part of a job that he was on. Mm. But certainly interpersonal conflict, he doesn't really suffer with anyone because he knows when to speak and when to be quiet, and very respectful fellow.
Yeah, and this episode really displays that perfectly, doesn't it? It's a fantastic Slim Charles episode.
I mean, it's a strange thing to say about someone who is, quite openly a murderer. It's a really strange thing to say. But I don't know, it's hard not to say it. I guess in one sense we do get quite a small snapshot of their lives and their day-to-day habits and whatnot. But in their presentation in the show, Slim Charles comes across as very likeable in all these scenes, especially when, like you say, he's trying to juggle his loyalties. It's also interesting how it shows these. We mentioned it before about reform and the theme in this season, and how in the political arena we have Royce trying to sort of, in a way, secretly keep the status quo. He's trying to keep things as they are by gently pushing people away and making it seem like he cares and making it seem like he wants to do this, that, and the other. But secretly, he's just trying to keep things the way they are, and then which obviously keeps him in power. And then we have Stringer, who's trying to secretly make change rather than keep it the way things are. Whereas, Avon is trying to proudly and very sort of barbarically state his claim and say that this is the way things are. He's very proud about keeping things the way they were, the way they used to be, how we've got to keep all these corners, we need to keep all this territory to maintain our reputation. And Stringer is trying to secretly make the reform. It's kind of the differences between the different styles of reform in the show.
Yeah, that's very true. Yeah, because we kind of see Avon as the traditionalist, but in many ways he is reforming in a different way, as you put it. Yeah, like there's just kind of just two spokes pulling away, and I guess it's that scene that we come to next when they're in the funeral parlor. Another really classic scene where they finally seem to lay the differences on the table a lot more strongly, and they're just kind of going off on their own ideas, as they always do when they have the prison chats. Stringer's kind of gone off to a point where he's quantifying every aspect of the game. Murder, police interest, it's all a cost to the business.
Yeah.
And an important part of holding on, but these things are an important part of holding on to tradition for Avon. So that's the problem there. And it's good to see that Stringer knows precisely how insulated he is by going straight. If they're making all this straight money, there's nothing that the government can do to, tie a string to the cat's tail. And it just, if that police interest dissipated, then Avon's got no source of pride. He needs things to stay the way they are to enjoy his position, to enjoy his corners and taking them and all the rest of it. So it's just really good to see the way they lay it on the table like that.
They're very openly stubborn, as opposed to someone like Royce, who's trying to placate people. And he's not trying to sort of make enemies in an outward way. He's just like, yeah, I'll look into that, I'll do that sort of thing. But then he doesn't. Whereas Avon is more of a, fuck you, no, that's not going to happen sort of thing.
And literally the next day, he sends Cutty and Slim out to do the dirty work.
Yeah.
Put it back to normal.
Start dropping bodies.
Yeah, there's no subtlety to it at all. It's just, here we go. On we go. And it's quite funny to see how much muscle they've lost, and they kind of list that name, that massive list of names.
There's something about the organisation feels so empty in these moments, because we basically just see, in regards to these jobs, it really does feel like it's just Avon and Cutty and Slim Charles. It doesn't feel like they have quite the same number of soldiers, all those sort of reinforcements, and a sense of, the posse, if you like, of people that was around them, that they were surrounded by, especially if you think about the club at Orlando's. They always seem to be surrounded by a lot of people. Whereas here, these scenes seem somewhat empty. It's just like the three of them. And it's like you say, when they're listing off all these names, some of which are totally preposterous.
Yeah. It's like eggy bread or something ridiculous. Or
Eggy mule, isn't it?
Eggy mule.
Or something like that. So yeah, there's just all of these names they're listing off. And it's
just building this history that no one had a part. I'm surprised Little Man. I thought Little Man obviously died, didn't he? But I was hoping a little season 1 Easter egg might pop up. But I don't think we got any. But yeah, that was cool. And I mean, yeah, as you were saying, it's clear that there's been a real shift in the generations. Slim and Cutty are experts. They're of an old breed that understand battle tactics and protection from investigation, and you get the sense that everyone else in the organisation is just a real kind of a little bit brain dead, really. Particularly Gerard and Sapper typify that, and then we also have the driver guy that they. I mean, this is jumping a little bit ahead to their kind of play against Marlowe, but we just have these guys that don't seem to understand any of the strategizing that Slim, Charles, and Cutty get up to.
Gerard and Country.
Yeah. That's it. Country's there as well. I think Country gets killed as well, doesn't he? Here.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's a real again trying to link between the old generation and the new generation, and the sense of order and intelligence versus just this kind of mindlessness.
So yeah, this is we're not quite up to that section yet. So this will move us on to our section where Stringer goes to Amsterdam. If you're ready to move on.
Yeah.
It's quite a meaty section here. So Stringer visits Amsterdam with Bodie and discusses moving a small part of their business there to test the waters. He tells Bodie to report directly to him. Bodie later assigns 2 young hoppers to the territory, and Stringer phones Shamrock at the funeral home to apologise for being late to meet Avon, as he had other business. Avon questions Slim Charles about the state of their muscle, the scene that we mentioned just a moment ago. Most of the older enforcers Avon knows are unable or unwilling to work with him. So Avon orders Slim Charles to attack Marlowe using Cutty and the best of the rest of his muscle. Meanwhile, Stringer is called back to the development site and told that construction is being held up by City Hall. And Krawcheck tells him to ask Senator Davis to hurry things along, as that's why they have him on the payroll. When Stringer meets with Davis, the senator asks for $25,000 to move things ahead, promising the permits by Monday. So Stringer doing the rounds here, and we have Slim and Cutty readying for the attack, getting ready for war, basically. And the best of the rest, as they put it, is a pretty poor showing indeed.
Yeah, definitely. As we were saying, there's only 2 people with brains left in the Barksdales by the sounds of it. Oh, don't know if you include Avon, I guess that's 3. But yeah, there's a real. It's fantastic to listen to Cutty and Slim go at it as they've really thought about their plan of attack, and just all the aspects of DNA protection and what to ditch and what not to ditch. It's a really ingrained understanding of the police and the way the street has to react to avoid the police, and also their naivety. Like Slim and Cutty are kind of stupid for trusting these clear idiots to carry out the plan properly, because they clearly didn't understand it. They kept asking pretty stupid questions about it.
I guess they have no other choice. I mean, they're probably not prepared to say to Avon, "We can't do it." You know, it doesn't make them particularly encouraging as soldiers if they're just going to turn down these jobs. So they just got to try and go ahead with it anyway. I think they probably are aware that something could go wrong, but they're just doing the best they can with what they got.
That's true. I mean, Avon made it pretty clear that there's no muscle left. Like, we listed everyone, and everyone has either gone straight or gone dead or gone to prison. So yeah, I guess that is true. It's just kind of, this is what we got. We got to do the best with what we got, and the best of what we have is really rubbish because we just decide to not wait for the phone call. We just go straight in and get killed. So not fun.
We must think that because obviously coming back to the earlier part of this section, must be quite an intriguing idea for Stringer, because when he's looking at Amsterdam, he's thinking that this is a semi-legitimate way for him to make a lot of money, and it's in a business-like term. He must be kind of intrigued that the police are now using these kind of tactics. And unsurprisingly, he goes in to test the waters.
Yeah, there's that great scene I mentioned where Bodie and Stringer are looking over Amsterdam as Colvin leaves the old lady's house. They're just kind of surveying the scene, and as you say, Stringer is really interested by this concept, but as you might expect, very untrustworthy of it, and he decides to put on a couple of young'uns, right? And I think he pays them $20 extra per day for the increased risk of going to prison in case it's a setup, which sounds like nothing, but I guess that speaks to how much you get paid for working as a hopper, perhaps.
I guess it's a very steep climb in terms of the money. Once you get to the top, it's huge. Middle level is probably reasonable, but at the bottom, it is the change, basically, in terms of the drug money.
And no one else is going to pay them any more, so I guess you can understand why you try and squeeze it.
And then at the end we have Stringer again meeting with Clay Davis, where he's sucking a little bit more money out of him. And again, Stringer just goes ahead with it. He's not going to ask any questions. He's told that that's the way it is. We have him on the payroll because this is what he does. And, you know, Clay is quite blatant about the whole thing. He pretty much says that 5,000 of this is just literally bribing me so that I can get these people to do these things. He doesn't make any attempt to hide it. But in a strange way, being so outward about the underhandedness of it all is able to mask the true underhandedness of it, which is just Clay Davis taking people's money and not really doing anything.
That is true, yeah. But because he claims that he is, dishonest to begin with, you assume that there can't be any extra dishonesty to it.
Yeah, he's lying about his dishonesty to hide his true dishonesty.
Yeah, it's it's a real Clay Davis maneuver.
Yeah,
no doubt. And it does kind of make Krawczyk's playing Stringer a little bit more expert. There's certainly a bit more subtlety there. It's attributing everything to the business and the slow nature of the permits and the rest of it. And this is just, okay, 25k and I'll sort you out. Otherwise you can go home. Like, just no subtlety whatsoever.
And we mentioned before about the amount of money that they must have. I mean, 25 grand probably isn't all that much to Stringer, really. He's a businessman. He's going to care about every little bit that goes in and out. But in the grand scheme of things, I can't imagine 25,000 is a huge dent in his assets.
Not for him, but in the context of getting some government permits, it does sound monumental.
Yeah.
This is the sort of thing that Stringer should be challenging at every step, as we've mentioned. And
especially when, I guess, in an idealistic world, you'd expect something like that to be... That's just the job, isn't it? You apply for these things and they get put through. And
yeah, I mean, there's obviously a long bureaucratic time frame attached to these things.
Yeah, but then you can somehow hurry it all through by paying a bit of money,
Yeah, that's not how it works. That's just how Clay Davis wants you to think how it works. So it's a real, it's a real power play from Clay. No shame. I guess that's the biggest frustration for Stringer, is he's now learning about bureaucracy, something that isn't apparent at all in the drug trade, where you can enact something and it happens. Like, there's no slowdown, and this is just something that he's having to adjust to. And he's wanting to buy his way out of bureaucracy, which is something that can't really be done.
Right, so do you want to move on to the actual attack itself with Cutty and Slim and their best of the rest?
Yes, let's do it.
So, Cutty and Slim Charles plan their attack and explain it to Gerard, Country and Chipper, the driver. Charles and Cutty will move on foot through the alleys to distract Marlowe's people, while Gerard and Country will drive by in a car. They also plan to dispose of the evidence afterwards, dropping the guns and casings immediately, but retaining the gloves to prevent DNA evidence reaching the police. Cutty orders the other soldiers to wait until they phone them in order to make their move. Once the soldiers are set up, Chipper spots a Stanfield lieutenant named Nene and ignores Country's insistence that they wait for the call. Chipper makes their move early to avoid missing out on the credit for the attack, but they accidentally alert the lookouts and Marlowe's crew is ready for them. Chipper is killed as they approach and the car crashes. Country is shot trying to get out the car, all before Slim Charles and Cutty are in position. Gerard manages to escape from the car and leaves the scene on foot. So, Cutty and Slim don't even get so much as a shot off. The whole plan is botched by a complete lack of patience.
Yep. And, what makes it even more frustrating is that Slim Charles explained the exact scenario beyond which they died.
Yeah.
In the meeting. What are you going to do if you drive off too early? You're exposing yourself to them, and you're going to get your head, bulleted in.
Your driver's going to get killed, and it's going to crash.
Exactly. Yeah.
And then you're kind of a sitting duck. Stringer has the foresight in that situation and the experience to know exactly what's going to happen, and lo and behold, it does. Yeah.
So it's so frustrating, and they come down an alleyway and then they go and ditch their guns after 5 seconds. Like, it's a real lack of a, it's not really the last Game of Thrones episode. It's a real disappointment in terms of action there. But I guess the interesting part of this scene is when Slim and Cutty Actually, this is later on, isn't it? When they go off and do their own thing with Fruit's crew. Sorry, I kind of thought they were linked there for a moment, but we'll come back to that a bit later.
But yeah, there's I'm not sure if there's meant to be a slight parallel of a lack of patience here, where we have Chipper and Country, the sort of, well, Chipper especially, not having much patience and wanting to make the move in order to get the credit. And it reminds me somewhat of Greggs and McNulty having little patience to wait for any kind of body or anything like that on Stringer. They want to jump in and go quickly and get the credit for nabbing him. Mm. And yeah, there's a possibility that if they jump too early as well, they could be exposing themselves to something. Yeah, it's tenuous, I know, but it just it reminded me of their situation somewhat.
Everything's a parallel. So yeah, don't you worry.
So yeah, that's the attack that they make. Slim and Cutty having to deal with some serious amateurs there, so demonstrating the very sorry state of the Barksdale organisation.
Yeah, you can understand why, of course, when they've been so money-oriented for the past year, and no one's been doing any target practice. Of course, they're going to be ropey when it comes to the actual muscling. So it makes sense.
I guess it may seem like to Avon that they've got all of this money, but they're not really spending it on anything that protects what's made that money in the first place.
Yeah, very
Whereas
true.
Stringer is more interested on putting that money into things that will remove the need for those systems to make them the money anymore. But at the same time, not really. If he doesn't get that transition right, then the whole thing comes crumbling down.
Yep. So it's now on to Avon to build up their muscle base again, which could take quite a while.
So yeah, which brings us on to the next bit where we have Slim Charles and Cutty reporting into Avon and telling him that without Gerard's side of the story, they won't know what happened. The Stringer suggests that the killings will draw police attention and that they need to slow down, build up their muscle. Avon tells Stringer that he wants to act himself, but Stringer reminds him that he's on parole. Slim Charles offers to handle it with just him and Cutty so that there are no mistakes, and Avon gives them the go-ahead. Stringer changes the subject to the new developments in Amsterdam, but Avon is distracted. One thing that I did note about this scene is, it's a pretty minor thing, but it seems like Avon needs to practice a little bit more trigger discipline. He's kind of, he's sort of pointing this gun around, and he's actually got his finger on the trigger. I mean, I don't know a whole lot about guns, but I do know that you're not supposed to put your finger on the trigger unless you actually intend to shoot someone.
He's got safety on, right?
Well, even then, I think you're not really supposed to. I think it's sort of considered good trigger discipline. But it just reminded me of it just made me think that he's there, kind of, he's literally pointing the gun at Cutty with the finger on the trigger. It just seemed a bit precarious.
Oh, well, he a gangster.
Yeah, he's clearly not all that concerned about health and safety.
No,
it's not exactly a top on the list of priorities.
Yeah. I know they've got the Robert rules running through there, but I don't think they've probably got military standards running through either.
Well, clearly not, as we've seen in a lot of their gunplay. Not like Marlowe, as we see later on, going for that slightly more calculated, proper training and target practice and everything.
Yeah.
Get a stronger sense of militarization there, whereas with the Barksdales, it's all very gangster. Laissez-faire.
Yeah, definitely. What else is there in that section? There's the bit where Stringer talks to Avon about Amsterdam, is that right? At the end?
Yes, that's right, yeah.
Yeah, so there's the...
But Avon's basically not really listening.
Yeah, or he might be, but I think contemplating the idea that the drug trade might become legal is a far scarier concept to Avon than them going legit. I think it's their job is over if this becomes a legal thing. Our place in the world is finished. So it's clearly something that Avon does not want to hear much about. But Stringer, as we mentioned before, is very, very interested. It marries up completely with his ideals of making the money and forgetting the real estate.
And Avon seems to completely forget that he's just come out of prison. He's totally prepared to make a move himself. That's how committed he is to his reputation and trying to get the work done. He's willing to do it himself.
Yeah. Well, no one's going to respect me if I sit around and pretend I've got out of prison. I need to make a move and put my mark back on the street.
And he's basically holding that gun just to kind of comfort himself in a way, to kind of reassure himself that he is part of it somehow. He's armed and ready to go, even though he may not actually be able to do the job himself. He's just like comforting himself with it as a reminder that he is a gangster. He is really in this, even though he's not technically able to act. Otherwise, he's going to go straight back in prison.
That is very true. Yeah, good point.
So yeah, that's that little bit there. Should we move on to the next bit? Bit Marlowe.
Yeah, sure.
So after the shootout, Marlowe visits his advisor Vincent at the rim shop. Vincent warns Marlowe that Avon will have to come back again after the embarrassment of the failed assault. Marlowe tells him he is not worried and that the failed attack speaks to the quality of Avon's soldiers. Vincent warns Marlowe that taking control of the drug trade will inevitably end with him either dead or in prison. But Marlowe is more concerned with taking control than the aftermath, and he readies his soldiers Snoop and Chris Partlow for the coming war. So first appearance of Snoop here, which in classic Wire fashion is done without much fanfare, is very subtle.
Yeah, definitely. It's Snoop and Chris together in their double act as well, kind of smiling and getting all excited about Marlowe's ambitions, which is kind of a classic pose for those two, really.
Yeah.
So it really feels like we're establishing that season 4 composition on the street, and it's odd that these guys didn't appear before. Like Marlowe's clearly assembling his crack team, and Snoop has been promoted by the looks of things. So yeah, and it's nice to see Marlowe really cement his ambitions for the crown here that he hasn't done so far. And he's been spurred on by witnessing how amateur the Barksdale's attack was earlier. Ironically, it probably has led to them to more violence, that they feel more confident going up against them, seeing how ropey they really are.
Yeah.
So they also mention the additional machinery they have. They have far more advanced weaponry, far more heavy weaponry. As you mentioned before, they do a lot of target practice, and we're reminded that they're fully weapons trained. They're kind of militarized, as you were saying, and this is a pretty scary concept, and doesn't bode well for the remainder of the season and for the Barksdales. So a pretty scary scene. Good to see Snoop introduced in an appropriately scary scene for her. And yeah, just good things to come at the moment from Marlowe. Again, they're keeping a lot of his character under the wraps for the moment.
It's a bit of a Marlowe hype scene, isn't it?
Yeah. Definitely.
He just wants to wear the crown. He doesn't care what happens. He's just going to do everything he can to wear that crown, to be the man on top.
Vincent's advice is just not relevant at all to him.
Yeah.
It's just kind of like, it's my turn to wear the crown. No.
There's no sort of side of caution, really, with Marlowe.
Yeah.
I guess he is very cautious about certain elements, but when it comes to his ambition, he's not really willing to hold back. He's just going to find another way in order to make progress in some other subtle way. Holding back is not really his style.
No, not at all. So, a great scene. But I don't think... Does Snoop say any words at all in this scene?
No, I don't think she says anything.
Yeah.
It's just like furniture in the scene, just introduced completely casually. It's like major character who's really interesting, takes a pretty big stand later on, especially in season 4. Just announced, or not announced at all, really. Don't think her name is even mentioned.
No, not at all. I mean, he says, we're going to make this happen, Chris, right? He says Chris quite firmly. But yeah, the Snoop is just completely sidelined as an extra in this scene, really.
So shall we move on to our next bit? We have a shorter bit here.
Yep.
We have Brianna straightening Donette's hair and Donette discussing D'Angelo. Brianna gives her blessing for Donette to pursue a relationship with Stringer, and Donette relates her visit from Detective McNulty to Brianna, who is startled by McNulty's allegation that D'Angelo's death was not a suicide. Yeah,
so it really feels like these two are tiptoeing around their true thoughts. There's a real sense that the idea of D'Angelo being murdered kind of rings true with both of them, but they're really not going to go into that territory. And just the way they're talking about it, there's this kind of plausible deniability. Perhaps they're pushing it to the back of their minds. But it's clearly not something that Stringer wants Donette to be talking about. She's perhaps running her mouth a little bit. And it clearly doesn't sit well with Brianna, who is now being set up for her big, I guess, demolition scene, really, when she goes to see McNulty, and McNulty really puts her in her place.
Yeah.
I think that's coming next episode, so we'll have to look forward to that.
It's pretty devastating for Brianna.
Yeah. Definitely, yeah. And we see that Brianna is okay with Donette dating Stringer.
Yeah, I guess it's a fairly minor thing in terms of the Wire as a whole. But I don't know. I suppose from Brianna's perspective, she just wants Donette to be part of it and provide a certain security, especially if there's a child involved.
Yeah.
She's kind of living through that child. She's kind of living D'Angelo through the child of his, so she's probably just thinking what's best for the kid, so she knows that she can get set up with Stringer, who can provide certainly a lot of financial security, then that's good for the child.
And I think it might be the only time in the show where Donette verbally expresses some sort of devotion to D'Angelo, or at least feelings towards him. It says, it's not that I'm not cut up about D, but...
Well, words come out of her mouth that somewhat represent emotion, but it doesn't come across as particularly genuine. I'm not sure if that's intentional or not, but it certainly seems a bit flaky.
Well, I mean, it's kind of it's suffixed with "but," isn't it? So it clearly isn't quite what she wants to say.
So that brings us on to our final part of the Monster Barksdale organisation bit. So we have Cutty and Slim Charles cruising the neighbourhood, and they find Fruit's crew unprepared. Slim Charles shoots and kills Boo, and Cutty has a shot lined up on Fruit but allows him to escape after glancing at Boo's bloodied body. Slim Charles believes he must have begun shooting too early and spoiled Cutty's shot. So when they report back to a dissatisfied Avon once more at the funeral home, Avon tells Cutty he's disappointed he didn't kill anyone, and Slim Charles claims responsibility. But Cutty speaks up and admits that he couldn't shoot Fruit because the game is no longer part of him. Avon asks Cutty what he'll do now, and Cutty has no plans, but is sure that the game is not for him. Avon then lets Cutty go on good terms and tells Slim Charles that he still has respect for him. So this is it. Cutty finally has come to the realisation that maybe it isn't right for him to be doing these things. After all this temptation and all of these moments where he's getting teased slowly back and he's come all the way, he's come to do the work that pays, the work that he claimed he was looking for. When it came down to it, he couldn't do it. He couldn't pull the trigger.
Couldn't do it. Yeah, this is a friend of the show, Tom Quee, who has guested once. I believe this is his favourite scene in the entire run, as he keeps mentioning on numerous occasions. But it is a pretty fantastic scene, and should we talk about the bit that leads up to it with the shootout with Boo and Fruit? And it did strike me strange that Slim didn't question the 10 seconds where Cutty just refused to shoot. I mean, obviously Slim couldn't see what was down the alleyway, but there was just no attempt to take that life that he was meant to take. And I guess Cutty's earned that much trust not to be questioned over what he does.
Yeah.
But it did strike me as a little bit obvious that he was having a bit of a morality crisis at that moment, and Slim didn't want to belittle him for it, which was really, really honourable of him. But yeah, it was a really, really good scene there, definitely. And seeing Fruit in a real distress moment was quite satisfying after a real comeuppance for what happened in the first episode.
Also, I can't quite explain it, but something about Cutty's appearance in this scene really brings out the old school style in him, where he's got those gloves and those aviators and the hat, and something about it just looks kind of like it's not of that time. It doesn't have the stereotypical modern gangster sense to it. Like Stringer isn't really dressed up for it. He's just there for it.
Oh, Slim, yeah, Slim is looking very badass.
Did I say Stringer?
You did say Stringer, yeah.
I meant Slim. Obviously.
Yeah, And of course, Slim's just wearing what he always wears. He's just on the casual, very badass, of course.
He's Slim Charles.
Yeah, and completely just in cold blood murders Boo, and then he's popped round the alley, knock him off, Cutty. Not a shot is fired though.
So he obviously can't handle the brutality, and like we see, there's this inhaler that's next to Boo, isn't it? It's kind of implied that he's obviously asthmatic.
Yeah.
So, he just can't deal with that. It's obviously a big shock to the system. Thought he was ready for it, but clearly not. And it's interesting. He must have come a long way. Like we said before, 14 years is going to be a very long time. But we are somewhat led to believe that this is the guy who supposedly brazenly committed a murder and then called the police for himself. So maybe at the time it was done somewhat out of horror at himself, and then over those 14 years, for whatever reason, it's all become a bit mixed up. Maybe he thought he was ready for it again, and in reality, it's still just as deep as it ever was.
Definitely, and I think that inhaler is there as well to help humanise Boo, and then of course contribute towards Cutty's real torment in this moment here, as he's just kind of sat there staring at fruit.
It must be hard to kind of get a sense of, I suppose, masculinity or a bit of an ego power trip or whatever over being a soldier when you're going around shooting people who are asthmatic.
Yeah.
It doesn't really paint a particularly powerful image to the part of the soldier when they're the kind of people they're going to go around shooting.
Yeah. Well, if he's standing on a corner.
He's lucky that Fruit didn't say anything, really.
Yeah.
If Fruit had said, thanks, I'll run away then. Or words to that effect.
That is true, yeah.
There would have been no way for Slim to pass that one off. It would have been pretty obvious. But I suppose Cutty ends up confessing to Avon nonetheless.
It may well have thrown Cutty over the edge if he did say something as well. Like, he may well have just pulled that trigger. I mean, it's perhaps unlikely, but I guess he was trying to look for a reason in his mind to do it, and he couldn't find one.
So moving on to the bit where we have Cutty finally sort of admitting that the game is no longer in him. It's interesting that despite the fact that Avon is losing yet another soldier, he's still retaining respect for him. It shows the amount of loyalty that Cutty must have shown in the past in order to warrant that.
Yeah, definitely, yeah. So it's a really big moment for the show. Quite a real goosebumps moment, really. Particularly the bit at the end where Avon, tells Slim that Cutty is a man today. After Slim, says back in his day, that's when he was the man. And this isn't a brilliant scene just for how bold this is on Cutty's part for confessing, this truth, and the way we see him building up to it as well. But it's also just the heart of the scene in general is just fantastic. And I think it's come at a great moment in the episode as well, because Avon plays the fool in this episode, really. Stringer is the one who's giving him all these pep talks, telling him how he's looking at it all wrong. And to some extent, I think we do get sucked into Stringer's idea of doing, or way of doing things. And then when we see Avon give mercy to Cutty like this, you're suddenly reminded how Stringer would just see Cutty as a cost, and he would probably want to kill him. And that really does separate the two a lot, and we see how Avon's kind of traditional values really do have a lot to answer for. So I think it was a really, really good way and a really big turning point in the show for me.
Yeah, it's a powerful scene for sure, seeing Cutty have to admit that after all he's done, he's just not capable of doing it anymore. It's almost like he's admitting his age in a way. He's like, I'm too old for this shit, basically.
Yeah. Whatever it is that makes you run like you run, I ain't got it. So it's, it was a lot, and it's just as powerful for Avon as it was for Cutty, and absolutely incredible. I think he's the only character in the show that manages to escape the game by request. I know characters like Poot escape as well, but it's just kind of just by circumstance they managed to run away. So it really is a very important moment.
Although we do hear about one of the former soldiers for the Barksdale organisation. Slim says that they've cleaned their whole act up. I can't remember which one it is.
Oh, that is true.
But he
yeah.
does say that one of them went and sort of sorted himself out and got out of the game. So clearly, it does happen to people.
You just need to, have so much trust in them to really, let them run away and do their own thing, knowing all they know. Like it's a real, a real kind of sacrifice to make, and one that we know Stringer wouldn't be making.
So that's that. Anything else you want to say about the Barksdale organisation before we move on to our final section, or our final major piece?
No, I don't think so, really.
Okay, then. Let's move on to the major case unit, which is our final big bit. And starting with Greggs and McNulty, as they mistakenly report to Daniels that Marlowe is running the best territory in the Western District on Stringer's behalf. They believe that because the Barksdale organisation made the transition out from the high-rise tower so easily that they must be working with Marlowe. They tell Daniels that Stringer's meeting with Marlowe was proof that he is still involved in the day-to-day business of selling drugs, and that they must act now before he's completely legitimate. Daniels rules that as long as Stringer is quiet on the violence front, then they have no call to investigate him.
Yeah.
So Greggs and McNulty getting a bit excited about, and understandably so, from their perspective, as they're trying to get a bit on Stringer, and suddenly, they see him with Marlowe, and they see that he's not so far away from the drugs after all.
Yeah, definitely. And at this point, though, it's odd, like halfway into the season, they still think Marlowe and Stringer are in business together. And even that is a very intriguing idea to them. And later on, when they find out that they're actually against each other, it becomes... Yeah. So it is. It makes sense, though. And
well, we've seen before that the people in the major case unit are not above making big assumptions in order to prove what they kind of hope happens to be the case.
Yeah. Well, as far as they're aware, these drug dealers talk to each other by, or make statements by violence or through violence. So the concept of sharing a room together for a chat is, between clans is just unheard of, really. And something that Prop Joe is making happen that they're not aware of.
Yeah, it seems like it's the only sensible conclusion to that, because, like you say, normally they wouldn't be quite that genial about the whole thing.
Yeah. And I quite like this scene as well, because we see McNulty doesn't take credit for something for once. He says what Kima has found here is that Stringer is directly still involved with the drugs. Kima did kind of find it, but McNulty normally likes to take the credit for these things, and possibly trying to play down his involvement here in case Daniels does unleash a shitstorm, which he does. So he's been thinking ahead there. They really put the case heavily towards Daniels, like now or never, Lieutenant, and it's practically a blackmail, really. And Daniels does make the right move, like as much as you could tell he was about to go either way with switching over to letting them look into Stringer. He had to stay firm to his career moves, really, and follow what the bosses want, particularly in light of what the chat he's been having with Ronnie this episode as well. I think that's been playing quite heavily on his mind, and in that case it was the right call to make.
Yep. So let's move on to the next bit more McNulty and Greggs. Yeah, we have McNulty and Greggs meeting with Anne Arundel County State's Attorney Kendall Remnick to discuss reopening the D'Angelo Barksdale case based on medical examiner Frazier's findings that it may not have been a suicide. She tells them that she will not put out another murder on our county's books without a suspect. Later, McNulty and Greggs go drinking and discuss their failure to get a case started against Stringer. They also discuss their relationship difficulties, and McNulty mentions D'Agostino. So yeah, like you say, they go and try and get some help from outside, but once again we see the stat game being played, and the county state's attorney is not prepared to put yet another number on their books either, any more than the mayor would, just because it's all based around those numbers. Not prepared to make themselves look bad just so that they can catch the person that they happen to want to get.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Even outside the city, they're looking to avoid making these murders, yeah. And it really is dead ends everywhere they go for Stringer. For McNulty and Kima even. And you can understand their frustration, but they really have to drop it. And at this point in time, they're kind of seesawing between either Stringer or D'Angelo, depending on which one has recently been flamed the most or dismissed the most. And they're really clutching onto these cases that they're really emotionally involved with, perhaps beyond some interpretations of reason. And it's getting to the point where they really just need to pack it in and go and see Quintel, because Quintel seems pretty high profile. Like, we saw him at the Co-op as one of the big drug lords in the city. I'm sure he's an interesting target to chase as well. It's just this emotional attachment from season 1 has really got them in this kind of kind of almost unlogical twist. So,
and then we have a little bit where they go and they're going drinking, and they discuss a little bit more about obviously how they failed to get the case going with Stringer. And they talk about their relationships, and it's interesting to see McNulty pinning quite a lot of hopes on D'Agostino, despite the fact that when they met up, she clearly was very disinterested in him. And the next morning, he seems to suddenly have this assurance that she's the one for him or something.
Yeah, that's strange, isn't it? It's not clear at this point whether they have seen each other more than once.
It's not. It's also not clear whether he's saying this just to kind of save face or whatever in front of Greggs to kind of show off a little bit, or if he is genuinely kind of foolish enough to fall for women in that way.
Yeah, it's true, possibly. I don't feel like he'd have the same desire to be prideful in front of Kima. It kind of feels a bit more honest.
Yeah.
It feels like he is genuinely a little bit delusional with the way he interprets Terry.
But we've also seen before that McNulty does sometimes, he is going to hide his certain lifestyles, and that also lifestyle choices. But it also means that when it's established to others, he may also want to maintain that sense of who he is. He doesn't want to come across as like a loser or whatever, and I guess he knows Greggs well enough to know that they have some similarities, so he wants to keep those similarities up. He maybe doesn't want to share that he tried and failed with her. He wants to make it seem like he's still got it or whatever. Whereas to someone like Daniels, we see that he's trying to be a little bit more straight up and, I'm just going to nurse this for a little bit longer, and then he ends up getting staggeringly drunk,
Yeah, that's true, yeah. It's kind of saving face, definitely.
So even McNulty is not above telling a few white lies to maintain a certain appearance to others.
Yeah, certainly. Although he did say, he did admit some flaws when he said that I need this lady to tell me when my shit stinks.
Yeah.
Freeman with tits, as he puts it. So, he's certainly not completely blind to the fact that he's a very flawed person.
It may seem somewhat endearing, but I can't imagine Terry would enjoy being described in that manner.
Yeah, and the way he talks about Elena as well, when they do bring up the subject, it's all he can say is "fuck her," and then it's a real kind of, considering he does want to get back with his wife, it's a real kind of the wrong attitude to take. And then he describes Terry, and he says, "There's this woman at this thing for my kids," and like he's pretty much answering his own questions about why he can't find a stable family. And he just can't see it. Like, he needs to care more and care about himself and his job less. And the way he talks about his family and his kids and the thing for his kids, really gives it right away that there's just not enough empathy right there for him to make it work. So it's just a product of who he is, really.
Yep. So that brings us to our penultimate section. We have Greggs finding Bubbles implementing his plan to sell oversized white T-shirts to the young drug dealers. Bubs tells Kima about the gunfight and the 2 dead Barksdale soldiers on the corner of Mount and Fayette. Bubbles sets Greg straight about the relationship between the Stanfield and Barksdale crews. So she and McNulty report the new killings to Daniels. Daniels tells them that it's no longer about the case, but about their insubordination, and sends them away. Later they discuss Daniels' stubbornness, and Greg suggests that a request from Colvin might change Daniels' mind. So once again, Bubbles is able to provide very important information. He's the man on the lookout. He knows exactly what's going down. So he's able to kind of keep the information flowing to the police all while going straight.
Yeah, he
Setting
finally
up his little
reveals
t-shirt
that.
business.
Yeah, definitely, it's good to see. And Milo and Stringer are now no longer friends, as we discover. Well, I've never been friends, but we now finally know it from Bubbles, as you mentioned. Very important info. And Westside's now going to be Baghdad.
Yeah,
Just bringing up those 9/11 parallels.
exactly. Yeah.
And, so it's really nice to see Bubs doing his thing, and did he throw in a few free teas for the police? I think that was kind of part of his giving back to them.
I'm sure Greggs needs loads of large, oversized white t-shirts.
XXL teas, yeah. Oh, well, nice of him nonetheless. And what else did we have in that section?
This is the beginning of Bubbles Depot as well, as he calls it. Bubbles Depot.
Oh yeah, did he have the name tag on it this time, or is that later on that we get that?
It's later on that he establishes the kind of general store, as it were. On this one, it's just Whitey sale, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true.
But yeah, it's kind of the beginning of his more general business, where he's selling all sorts of stuff like pirated DVDs and toilet roll and all sorts of stuff.
Yeah.
So yeah, I guess that's about that bit. I mean, we have Daniels obviously getting very angry at them, giving the whole "what is my rank" thing that he gives them. He's obviously very unhappy about their insubordination, despite being told they are still coming back to him with stuff to do with what's going on with Stringer.
Yeah. But, he's made the right call. I mean, Stringer's got some past demons, but if he is no longer an urgent target in terms of lowering the body count, which he isn't, then, what's the point in chasing him? It just really is an emotional attachment for Kima and McNulty and nothing more.
It kind of makes you think of the similarity to the epigraph for this episode, where in McNulty's sense of going after Stringer, it's almost like, he's just a McNulty and he wants his Stringer.
Yeah.
That's just the way he is. He's not like Daniels, where he can just focus on the pragmatics of the case and sort of getting things done, getting these cases together, what it takes to provide seniority with the confidence that these style of details are actually worth putting the time into it. Instead, he's focusing on rep, essentially. He's focusing on this feud that he has with Stringer, that in regards to the importance of his job, which is stopping people from, or at least trying to solve their crimes of people getting murdered, he's sort of completely ignoring that.
Mm. Yeah, definitely. So, getting carried away, old McNulty.
This brings us to our very final section of the episode, and we have McNulty meeting with Colvin outside the Western Precinct to present the case to him. Colvin sees that he's going behind Daniel's back, and McNulty asks him to keep his name out of it. The next day, Colvin, Deputy Commissioner Rules, and Commissioner Burrell meet with Daniels, who has now been dubbed as the department's hero to the rescue, to give him his new assignment.
Ouch.
So McNulty, despite having already been told again that he needs to not be so insubordinate and focus on the major case unit, he continues to go straight behind Daniels' back. And despite the fact that Daniels has been trying to stay out of the whole deal, he gets drawn in anyway.
Mm.
So it's classic Wire ending, where it's all kind of like, this is what you wanted to do, and we're just going to take that right away from you now and force you into the shit again.
Yeah. And it's fair enough, that scene happens, but it's actually McNulty's face that's missing from that scene, and that his face hangs over the scene and kind of gloats at Daniels as he has, from on high, the
fuck the bosses, I believe it is.
Yeah, exactly. That mandate has changed, and oh dear, there's really going to be a shitstorm coming next episode for McNulty. But yeah, it's quite brilliant, really, how that ties together with the problems they're having in the West, as spurred on by the Barksdale War. as spurred on by Avon coming home. So it really does all link together very intricately here, and affects the major case unit pretty heavily.
So yeah, that's sort of lining us up for everything that's going to happen in the next episodes.
And
but
it was
otherwise...
It was of course Kima's idea of, wasn't it? I probably forgot to mention, but
oh yeah, that's true. Yeah.
She laid the groundwork for McNulty to go and fuck the bosses, which is unusual because that's normally his role.
Yeah.
But yeah, sorry.
Yeah, I mean, otherwise that pretty much is it for the recap. That's all the sections.
Yeah, did we mention Ronnie and Daniels having a chat? Is that one thing we came up? I think that's the only thing we might have missed.
We can certainly do that now. I'm not sure if I've got it on here. Let me just double check. Oops, I'm not doing a very good job of doing this right now. Yes, Yes, well, he does have the bit with... yeah, we did mention that earlier, where we have Daniels raising Marla's political aspirations in conversation with Rhonda, telling her that he feels he owes Marla the supportive husband routine because she's supported his career for so long. That was a little bit we had with Rhonda and Daniels. Is that the bit you're thinking of?
Yes, that's right. Yeah, yeah.
That was actually the very first section.
Oh right, gosh, really missed it out at the top then. Yeah, no, it was just like Daniel's really painting himself as the guilty party in the relationship, and I feel like, as I was saying earlier, Marla has more cause to be guilty, really, and it really made for me Daniel's among the most humble characters in the show, and just bad seeing Ronnie struggling so much with the idea of him being the proud husband on the arm.
There was a couple of extra bits, actually. Now, looking at my notes, there's a couple of small bits I forgot to mention from earlier. The elderly lady that Colvin wants to move. Obviously, she's still in Amsterdam.
Yeah.
I think her name is Mrs. Hazel or something like that.
Yeah.
She mentioned something about her husband buying the current place that she's in with factory money. It's kind of suggesting the glory days of when working down in the docks and in the factories and doing that kind of working class style career was considered something that made you a decent amount of money and could buy you a house and everything. It's kind of this callback to season 2 in a way.
Yeah, very good point, definitely. And the idea of that employment that actually kept the community as a community, and it's now completely flown away.
Yeah. And the other little bit is, I think we mentioned before how certain small actions in The Wire can lead to have these massive consequences. If Cutty shoots fruit in that section where he's able to do so, then essentially Randy is saved in season 4.
Oh yeah, because he gets tangled up with Lex, doesn't he?
That's right. Yeah, he kind of steals his girlfriend, doesn't he?
That's it. And then Lex, of course, is the starting point of season 4. Which, yes, okay.
And then Randy doesn't get that information. Then he's no longer sort of involved with the police, and then he doesn't get his house firebombed and everything. If fruit is killed there, then Randy is like fine in season 4.
That's a mad dominoes effect, that. And then, of course, the irony of Cutty wanting to have a calmed conscience. If only he knew what he'd prevent if he'd have shot fruit.
Yeah.
So
no way for him to know that. That's for sure.
No. Yeah, that's a great spot, actually.
Is there anything else? Anything else you want to talk about in terms of the episode as a whole?
Yeah, as a whole, I thought there was a fairly clear theme here that they obviously brought up because Amsterdam was now operating, and its benefits and disbenefits were clearly obvious. It was that kind of old and new. They could have a little bit of reminiscing about the old district where there was not so much violence, there was more employment, there was a community spirit, and that was kind of shown in direct contrast to all the mayhem of the opening, just after the credits, and then obviously referenced a few times the old lady, and then that was also shown through Avon and Stringer having the real battles. And I think Avon letting Cutty off the hook was a real callback to those old school moral values that people talk about, and how being like that really is kind of fair and altruistic, and what Stringer's got going on is great. Like, it's a really admirable course of action. It lowers the murder rate inadvertently, but essentially it is kind of money centric and selfish, and it will, it will turn Stringer into a bit of an arsehole. But I think it was good to see that the episode was calling lots of links between the old and the new.
Yeah, that's nice. I guess it's trying to put links as well, as is often surreptitiously done in this season with 9/11 and the whole Iraq War thing. Felt like there was a call to that when we see all that police brutality and the strong enforcement of reform in order to supposedly try and make things better for people, like forcing them into this position where they will now be free, or they'll now be able to do these things without being hindered. But you have to be brutal to them in order to do it. In the sense that was what was being done with the whole Iraq War as well, trying to improve things for people. We're gonna liberate you, but we're also gonna force you to do it if that's not what you want.
That's very, very true.
So yeah, that was definitely a strong. I mean, Bubbles himself describes it as being like Baghdad.
Yeah.
So if that's not blatant, I don't know what is.
That's great. Yeah, it's a really, really nice catch.
Man, just let me talk to the boy Marlo, see if I can't smooth this shit out. I mean, it ain't gonna be overnight, because the nigga only knows what he knows. But I think I could talk some sense in his head.
Yeah, I ain't no suit-wearing businessman like you. I'm just a gangster, I suppose. And I want my corners.
There's clear themes this time around in terms of our 4 sections. I don't know what you had in terms of your characters, if any really stood out for you.
It's a really good performance from Wendell Pierce as Bunk, I think, in that scene. Like, he really does nail it, especially as a character that doesn't normally get these very intense moments. He tends to be quite, not bumbling per se, but he's just quite a humorous character. So when we see him in a period of rage here, it's very effective. I also think Cutty is excellent in this episode. He really captures all of that experience, and then the realization at the end that he finally has to admit, not just to Avon but to himself, that it's not in him anymore. It's a level of brutality that he's just not able to deal with so casually.
Yeah, definitely.
So I think Cutty and Bunk are definitely pulling their weight in this episode.
Very good choices. As far as, looking back in the episode, the 3 that stick out to me really were Avon, Cutty, and Slim. They're the 3 involved in that final chat at the end, but throughout the episode they really do exhibit fantastic traits of their characters, and they're all played fantastically well, so I think they stood out very much for me. I think Daniels and Colvin on the police side as well this episode show us some new things, particularly with Daniels' battle between Marla and Ronnie and his loyalty to his wife, despite, I think, the pain that she's put him through. I think he still sees himself as the victim, which is kind of sad but also very humbling. So it's good to see Daniels put in a new predicament. And again, Colvin comes up all the time recently as a good character, but he just consistently brings out the most memorable scenes throughout season 3, and is a real ray of sunshine in The Wire, like a real morally quite bright character, I guess. There's not too much of a dark side to him, but then again, he was allowing all of this abuse in the name of free drug trade earlier on, so there's still an element of black and white there.
Speaking of memorable scenes, is there any in particular that you want to highlight for episode 6?
Yep. Obviously, Cutty leaving the Barksdale crew at the end. That was great. I think other scenes in the funeral parlour were also very memorable. So the scene where Cutty and Slim Charles and Co plan the shooting and strategize, and they really show off their knowledge. And they're kind of, and of course they draw parallels between the old and the new there, and the smart and the dumb. And then, of course, as you mentioned, the Bunk and Omar chat is a real kind of hallmark of the episode and of the series in general. where we see Omar in an unusual place of weakness. Not just physical weakness, but real psychological weakness, which is unusual for Omar here. So, fantastic moments.
Yeah, I was going to say pretty much the same thing, same scenes really. And there, yeah, as usual, there's a lot of scenes to be taking in. So but those are the ones that definitely seem to stand out, especially the scene with Cutty having to leave. That was a very powerful moment for me.
Yeah, definitely.
So let's talk a little bit about.
Odd, yeah.
Sorry, you were going to say.
I was just bringing us into the title. Actually, it's odd that as Cutty leaves, the title is Homecoming.
Yeah,
I was just wondering what your thoughts on that were.
Yes, I mean, obviously the big homecoming is Avons, and he's sort of bringing his focus back to what he wants the organisation to be, what he expects it to be, about the standards that he expects it to have. We saw a little bit of that in the last episode, but it feels like here he's trying to make a little bit more of a stamp, even though he came back essentially in the last episode. It's here that he really actually is bringing home his ideas for the organisation, what he expects it to be, the standards he expects it to have, and like we said, he's even prepared to make a move himself to be the one that's going to go out there pulling the trigger. He's so desperate for soldiers, so he wants that to kind of be his big homecoming. So it's also in contrast to Cutty wanting to leave the game, so sort of just a bit of a contrast there. I didn't really think of anything else that the title could really be referencing there.
I don't know. I saw that perhaps Cutty leaving the Barksdale was the true homecoming for him. He kind of manages to leave and become morally clean, I guess, once he leaves. So that could be one way of looking at it. And also, the vast majority of the Western District becomes a home again. You can start living there and have a functioning society, as we saw, and that may well feed into the title as well. Home is coming back, sort of thing.
Yeah.
But I mean, I do admit that those are a little bit tenuous, and the title isn't necessarily the most obvious in this case. Yeah. Yeah,
it's difficult to pick out much else there, other than Carcetti's homecoming with his toast in the VCR.
Yeah, that's true. And perhaps Avon. I mean, Avon's been home for a couple of episodes now, but that feels like the most obvious link, like Avon getting out of prison and coming back. So, yeah. And then, of course,
the epigraph. Yeah. Also Avon.
Yeah, just a gangster, I suppose. So it's about time he made his mark on the show again. He's been pent up for a long time. And he comes back in big style, and I guess the epigraph is just announcing that for us.
Yeah, Avon knows exactly who he is. He's not interested in some brave new world where it's all about reform and whatnot. He wants it exactly the way that he understands it, which is this institutionalized gangster notion that he's a gangster and he has his corners. That's what he has. Without his corners, he doesn't really have his reputation, and he lives and dies on his reputation as far as he's concerned.
Yep.
And his sort of casual, I'm just a gangster, I suppose. He seems very blasé about the fact that he's stuck in this cyclic relationship with the game. He doesn't seem to be too bothered by it. That's what he lives for.
Yep, definitely. Okay.
So yeah, that's it. That's episode 6. That's Homecoming.
Sweet.
And
we will be back
the next week. Yes, series 3, episode 7.
Backburners.
Yeah. So yeah, that'll be a good episode, no doubt.
Yep, and you'll be able to download that on the 12th of June.
Yeah, 12th of June. That's right. So thanks very much for joining us again, and thanks for all of the emails and whatnot. Especially we really enjoyed the little package we got from Pizza Eaters. Going to be keeping hold of that for sure. And when I meet up with you, Toby, I'll make sure to give you your half, give you your badge and your card and your little activity book.
Oh, can't wait.
Maybe I'll give it to you just in time for the winter for those rainy days.
Yeah, that's a little way ahead.
Yeah, I'm enjoying the
Yeah.
sun for the time.
Yeah, I'll look forward to my my activities later on.
And thanks again for joining us. Feel free to drop us any more emails. Usual address, caughtonthewire@gmail.com, or the contact form on the website at caughtonthewire.wordpress.com. You can get hold of all the episodes, get on the YouTube, check out the blog if you want to read a little bit more about the package that we got, and little bits about each episode. Sometimes we post videos and whatnot. If you haven't taken a look at that, then you should. Otherwise, we will see you next week for Backburners. Take care. We'll see you then.